Okay, hi everybody. How's it going? Thursday. Seems like just a week ago we were in here doing this. I guess that's true, right? Has it only been 1 week? I feel like we've already done so many things. Have you guys had a nice first week of school? I guess this is our first full week and a half. Yeah, so far so good. Are you already tired? A little bit? No, not really. There's sort of, there's a beauty at the beginning of the semester, right? It's sort of like, I don't know, there's an energy in the air. You haven't been crushed by all the assignments and exams and all that sort of stuff yet, right? Have you been crushed yet? No, good. All right, that's what I like to hear. Now, unfortunately, tonight you will have an assignment. Speaking of getting crushed by assignments. So I've asked you to write about karma tales, and you don't have to already have it done. It's not due right now or anything. It's due tonight at midnight. So if you haven't done anything yet, that's probably okay. Although I am asking for 2 pages, so it's going to take some time to do it. So if you have some time today, you got to work on it. Do you have any questions about this before I go into anything? So it's on Moodle. I don't have a link here, so I'm going to assume you know how to find it. We've read these karma tales. So I have my book here. You don't have this big book. I have this big book. So it was just one excerpt from this big book. We read these karma tales. We're going to talk about them today. So again, today's class will help you prepare for this assignment. And basically what I'm asking you to do is to make your own karma tale, right? To create a story. It could be a real story, right? If you have some really interesting thing that happened to you that you would say is very karmic, you could go for it. Although, as you can see, I've underlined here, I want to see something about future and previous lives, right? So that might force you to expand reality a little bit, which again is kind of the point of the exercise. Or you could totally make it up, right? It could be any kind of story you want. It could be about animals, it could be about humans, it could be about gods, ghosts, demons in hell, or whatever, right? Any of the kinds of beings. Basically what I want you to do is write a karma tale, again, similar to one that we're going to discuss today. Does that make sense? Okay. That's the main thing. I ask that you explain it too. So basically, if it's 2 pages, you could do it's up to you to figure this out, but 1 page story, 1 page explanation, 1.5 page story, half a page explanation, whatever. You can figure it out. And in your explanation, support, your ideas to show that you have Buddhist concepts operating here using either Lopez, which again is this, the Karma Tales reading, or Kyon, which is not a huge request. It's basically just ground your analysis in the reading and in the class discussion. So again, questions? Chat, you guys have any questions? You guys all good? Questions on the assignment? Question mark? Okay. So Monday, you probably recall, was a snow day. We had a nice fully remote class. We talked about karma. And so this is all by way of review. We talked about how karma refers to moral actions, right? We talked about the example of Trump getting COVID. Remember that? And how I think the term that we used a lot was what goes around comes around, which is true. All of that's true. But I also wanted to point out that this is kind of a limited way of thinking about karma, right? Buddhists tend to expand that a little bit. And again, reading these stories, you probably saw that. There is this sense of you do bad stuff will happen to you, right? Did you notice that? Do bad stuff will happen to you. Do good stuff will happen to you. Yes. But just like when we were looking at that image on the very first day of class, we can be a bit more specific than that, right? So how does karma work for Buddhists? How do they expand it beyond more than just like what goes around comes around? Would you be able to put this into words at this point? Again, this is kind of a review. It's also kind of central to the assignment for tonight. So this is a good thing to think about. I know it's early, but what do we think?
It's not just comes around it affects future and previous lives. So previous lives, whatever karma or merit was accredited to that life could be present in this life, and whatever you do in this life could be present in some future life.
Good. Yeah, that's very nicely stated. So we are getting more specific, right? So one way is we're expanding it beyond just this life, right? And something we talked about is the system of karma kind of breaks down when you limit to just this life, right? Would you agree? I mean, we use the example of this class, and we use the example of our society. I try to create the class so you guys come to class. It's early in the morning. You know, I recognize that you are all here, and I want to reward you and promote this sort of good behavior, right? A lot of school, I'm sure, again, you either implicitly or explicitly know this, is this kind of socialization process where you get rewarded for being good. Have you noticed that? Right? And then some people compare it to being like a prison or something as a result. I wouldn't quite go that far, but you know, there's some parallels there. Um, but the real world, so to speak, the world beyond this classroom, although I would say this actually is the real world too, but the world beyond this classroom doesn't always work that way. Have you noticed that? Sometimes you can work real hard and try to get real good at something, put all of your efforts into being like the best like buggy driver, horse and buggy driver, and you're probably not going to get past Central Park, to be honest. Maybe you'll have a nice life driving horse and buggy in Central Park, but you know, that's not a highly valued skill in our society. And the same goes for, I don't know, like floppy disk manufacturers, even like CDs, right? CDs are disappearing. There's no value in the CD industry anymore. It's all streaming, right? So things change, things happen, and no, even if you put in a ton of effort, you're not necessarily going to get results. And so this leads to this culture that, again, I'm sure you guys know about, is to work smart, right? Work smarter, not harder. I feel like this is kind of the American way. It's something that we're all trying to figure out how to do. And so again, karma comes into this where there's a sense that you might do really good things in this life and still have a bunch of crap, a lot of horrible stuff happen to you. And that's hard to deal with, right? That's hard to deal with when you think about only this life, right? When we kind of limit things to only this life. But the Buddhists actually have some pretty good tools to deal with it, right? How do you think a Buddhist would feel if they work real hard and try to be real good, and then a bunch of horrible things like pandemics and other horrible things start happening to them? What do you think the Buddhists would do in that context? How do you think a Buddhist would think about COVID? What would they say about all these horrible things that are happening now? It's a lesson, okay. And what sort of? Can you say more? What kind of lesson is it? Yeah. Yeah, and it gets confusing because it's affecting so many of us too, right? There's almost a sense there's like a collective karma, which is yet another conversation, but it's a relevant one. Maybe we can come back to it. What do you think? Collective karma. Yeah, so how do you think that works? How does collective karma make sense?
Kind of like with a bunch of people kind of coming together essentially.
Mhm.
So it's like talking about like the United States is getting karma for like past bad actions because of like COVID or because of like Donald Trump getting the collective karma.
Yeah, and so that article, I don't think I have the slide here today, but from last time, we were saying, yes, Trump getting COVID is his karma for sure, right? But then I think the interesting part of that article, which I didn't assign, so you know you can read it if you want to, but the gist of it is he is our karma, right? He is America's collective karma. How is he America's collective karma? Because we're all using social media all the time, we're all watching reality TV all the time. We've set it up so he could plug himself into all of these media pathways and just run the place, right? He's a very skilled storyteller. He's very careful in his presentation in public, the way he speaks to people, the sorts of appearances he makes, right? He's very skilled at kind of playing with the media. And as a result, he took it all the way to the top, right? And so the argument is we set that up, right? Even though people kind of resisted him and said he's not my president and all that sort of thing, he is your president. You know, as an American, by feeding into these sort of systems that gave him the power to become president, he is your president, and it is your karma for creating him, right? We, in very sort of subtle ways, maybe if you didn't even vote for him, right? In very subtle ways, we still gave him power and people like him to continue to dominate our society, right? Okay, very good. We're getting into some good stuff here. One thing I left you with last time too, we have this quote from the Buddha. And again, chat people, I'm gonna keep my eye on the chat. So if you ever wanna participate, feel free to type. We've got this quote from the Buddha. I'll even put it in the chat. Where he says, "It is choice, O monks, that I call karma, having chosen one acts through body, speech, or mind." And we talked about we can act with our body, we can act with our speech. We're pretty familiar with how that works, right? But acting with your mind, did you guys think about that over the course of the week? How do you act with your mind? Any realizations? You guys ever think about class outside of class? I certainly do. I don't take as many classes as you do, though. I think this is one way. Sometimes I think about my workload and your workload. Well, I guess maybe we do have sort of similar workloads. I teach 4 classes, but it's 2 subjects. I teach 2 sections of 2 different subjects. So I'm constantly thinking about class and things that go on in class. And I was thinking about acting with my mind because, again, that came up. But I would like to hear your thoughts. So how do you act with your mind? Did anybody have any realizations about this? Did anybody act with their mind over the week? Yeah, so I think your sentiment is correct. I think your ideas are correct. Although I would change the language a little bit, right? Because basically you were saying you think and then your thoughts might lead to actions, right? Is that what you're saying? And what I would say is the thoughts themselves are actions, right? And they do lead to other actions, actions of speech and mind. I totally agree. They're all related with each other. But this is one reason I'm emphasizing this right now, is the thoughts yourselves, the thoughts themselves, how you think, are acts in and of themselves. Why does that matter? Mm-hmm.
For example, like you're about to do a test and you're like, oh, I'm gonna be terrible, then you're not gonna be motivated to do better because you're already in that mindset of where I'm gonna do bad, so you're eventually gonna end up doing worse.
Yeah. Yeah, have you guys had this experience before? I think there at least are some circles that call this manifesting, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Have you guys heard this term, manifesting the result that you want? It's basically like, I don't know, a very basic example is like you're shooting a foul shot in basketball and you imagine it going in, you visualize the result before you actually do it. And you could do the same with an exam. You could do the same with really any aspect of your life. And it almost kind of flirts with this little sense of magic, right? Where you can sort of try to manifest your thoughts. And I think, again, one reason I'm emphasizing this so much is we really separate those things in our lives, right? We separate science from magic to the point where magic is just for stories and it's kind of ridiculous. And, even in a university class like this one, we don't want to talk about it. Actually, in this class, we are going to talk about it. There's a book, I even have this book with me because I haven't scanned it yet. Buddhist Magic, right? It just came out this year, 2020, or no, last year, 2020. I wrote a book review of it. I really like this book. So we're going to read part of it. So anyways, it's all just to say, I think this idea of having some kind of efficacy of our thought is a bit foreign, right? Because then we enter into this realm of like, then I can just imagine something that will happen. And we all know, of course, that is absurd, right? And that isn't really, if I imagine like a milkshake, it's not just going to show up. But of course, that's not really what this is talking about, right? This is talking about something a bit more subtle. And I think this act, sow an act, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny, is really in line. I should learn you guys' names. What's your name? Ellie. So it's really in line with what Ellie was saying, which is basically, if you keep thinking in a certain way, you will become that way, right? Whether you want to or not. I'm going to kind of rail on phones a lot. I like my phone. I use my phone all the time. But I also don't like what it does to me sometimes when I'm just kind of scrolling through and doing like the endless waterfall of mindlessness, right? If I do that all the time, I'm not going to be able to focus as well. I'm not going to be able to think as clearly. I'm not going to be able to live my life in the way I really want to, right? Which is a problem. And so what do? Stop doing that, right? Look, I'm not saying throw your phones into a river or anything, but notice, right? Notice the way that these activities, even mental activities, affect you. And this is kind of the Buddhist intervention, right? Is once you see how this game is played, the various causes and effects in our lives, then you can manipulate the game, right? And get the effects that you want. Okay, maybe that's enough of that. Questions? Karma? Again, that was all a little bit of review. Again, bad and good. We can be more specific than this, right? So when you're writing your papers, you can be thinking, all right, here's some bad things that somebody does. They'll have a bad effect. Good things somebody does, they'll have a good effect. We can get more specific by thinking about what are the various motivations behind the actions, right? That's a big part of Buddhism. Is this person being greedy? Is this person being hateful, delusional? Are they jealous, right? Jealousy was a big part of the stories we read here.
I kind of have thought, is it considered good or bad to do good karma solely for the benefit of karma? Like, what if I did not care about RELS dropping all their books? I picked it up solely for my personal feelings.
That's an excellent question. Brielle, right? Okay. Yeah, what do you guys think?
Actually, I thought about that. I feel like in general, we were adding on to what you said, taking up books or even holding the door, like we do it for our own benefit because it makes us feel good. And even though we might be thinking, oh, I'm holding the door and I'm such a good person,
Mhm.
good things are going to come my way. I'm doing it because it makes us feel better about ourselves.
Yeah.
So I find that actually very interesting because, like, technically, by doing good things, you are manifesting good karma, but it is kind of confusing because you're also doing it for yourself.
It is confusing. All right. So basically, for people in the chat, can you guys hear your classmates when they talk? I can repeat their questions if you don't hear. So the question was basically, what happens if you do karma kind of selfishly, right? If you act in a good way to get good karma, to get good results, is that inherently a bad way to approach the system? And I would say this is sort of a riff on the Dalai Lama. He's made similar quotes like this, which is basically like, if you have to be selfish, why don't you be wisely selfish? If you have to be selfish, why don't you be wisely selfish? Which means, yeah, you want stuff. I want stuff. You guys probably want stuff. You want good grades in this class? Is it selfish to get good grades in this class? Is it selfish to recognize that by studying, you will learn things and then get good grades? Maybe it's a problem if you get sort of caught in that hole where you don't care about learning things and all you care about is the grade. I think that could be a problem. That's sort of a separate conversation, right? If you recognize the mechanisms required to get what you want, and then you proceed along those mechanisms to get what you want, in my mind, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? It might seem a little selfish, and I think actually this question of selfishness, right? I'm going to write it in the chat even. Selfish karma. This question of selfishness and karma is actually kind of, I'm not going to say uniquely American, but it doesn't show up so much in the Buddhist traditions. We'll see something like this in Zen, in fact, and the Zen answer to this question is to just do. Maybe you've heard this sort of language before, like Yoda has a riff on this, right? Do not try or whatever, just do. I guess Nike also has something like that too, just to do it, right? Where you act in the world, again, you recognize these mechanisms and you follow along with them, but don't get overly concerned with the results. Does that make sense? And again, this is wise, right? Because what can you control in an exam situation, for example? You can control how much you study beforehand. You can control how much of the reading you do right now, right? Exams in like 4 or 5 weeks. You can control the work you put in day by day between now and then. But once you take the exam, you know, make sure you get good rest and eat some food and maybe drink some coffee if that's what you like to do. Other than that, you can't control the result, right? After a certain point, you just kind of turn it in, hit the send button, boom, you're done, right? And so the Zen thing would be to say, all right, now that is over, and you kind of move on to the next task. But it's something, I think it's an excellent question, right? This question of being this sort of wisely selfish. I think, and what's your name?
Brendan.
Brendan, Ellie,
Yes.
and Brielle. All right, those sound like kind of, if I mixed your names together, they might become sort of the same. But I will try to keep this half of the room straight, and then I will move on to this half of the room. All right. And so, yeah, this is a tension within the tradition, right? To be this version of wisely selfish, and then what is beyond that? So maybe we could say it's the first step, right?
Yeah, but I also want to say that selfishness is not really a bad thing. Like, I feel like our society is like made it this negative word, but in reality, like we should care about ourselves. Like the relationship we have to ourselves is like important for being selfish, which means thinking about oneself before others is not inherently a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because in the end, everyone around you is gonna move on with their lives, and you're gonna have yourself. So like, I feel like looking at I feel like we need to evaluate the expectations in different ways.
Mm.
Because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just caring about yourself more than others. But we should be doing because taking the example of a test, you're going to study for yourself, but you can't control what other people are going to do on that exam. You can't take the exam for other people. It's all about like oneself. So I feel like, yeah, like being selfish is not really like as bad of a thing as we like need to think.
Mm-hmm. So I have two thoughts. Actually, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I don't want to dominate the class. What do you guys think? Is being selfish bad? Does anybody want to challenge this point? Because there is room to challenge it.
I still feel like if you're like getting degree with yourself,
Yeah.
that's like a way almost like self-improvement.
Uh-huh.
Working really hard. Like that's not like a way of being selfish. Maybe like the way that you learn about like doing that could be considered selfish. Not
Mhm.
like the act or the goal of self.
I think we're touching on kind of a nerve of our society, right? Is this an almost hand?
Yes.
It is an almost hand. Yeah. Feel free. What do you think?
I was kind of thinking like you have to like I feel like find a balance of how selfish you are. 'Cause if you're too selfish, then like you're just being like an asshole to like other people.
That's true. You don't want to be an
You're not
asshole.
selfish enough,
Yeah.
then you're being like an asshole to yourself. So
Yeah.
I think it's like you gotta find a balance.
Yeah, and so I think if we take a step back and look at the larger context, we live in a society where we're constantly competing, we're constantly expected to perform, right? And we also have this guy in the background too, quite literally in this classroom, right? Where, what is he doing? Is he being selfish at all? That's kind of his MO, is to be the opposite of selfish, right? He's hanging on a cross right here, right? Why is he hanging on the cross? Is for us. This is the message in the background. I mean, obviously, America is not 100% a Christian nation, but I think Christian values do penetrate into places where maybe we don't even expect them. And there's a sense that we should be like him. We should be self-sacrificing. We should give to others. But then at the same time, we should succeed. And if it's necessary, beat other people to get what we want, right? And these are both messages that are being sent to us all the time. And so I think as a result, there is this language of self-care, right? Have you guys heard of self-care? Which is kind of an interesting term. If you look carefully at these Buddhist scriptures, which of course I do all the time, this idea of caring a lot about yourself is the root of suffering. They come out and say, this is a bad idea to always care about yourself. And yet, I think in our society, we need something like this idea of self-care. In line with what Ellie was talking about, we need to look out for ourselves. Because if we don't, how are we going to get what we want, right? We're just going to be constantly getting stepped on and losing the game and losing the competition. And maybe it's sort of a noble gesture, but in the end, who wants to be noble and like not have any money and not have any power, not have any opportunities and not have any happiness, right? That sounds sort of horrible to me. Obviously, there are very admirable people who do live this way. Saints, right? But anywhere short of a saint, you're just sort of a sucker, right? Nice guys finish last sort of thing. So again, this is a difficult dance. And I think a lot of it comes from the incredible competition that is expected of us at all times, this expectation to perform.
What I meant also with focusing on yourself, it's also like obviously not okay to step on others in order to get like there's a difference between like bad selfish and good selfish.
Yeah.
I feel like good selfish is focusing on yourself, your goals, your like spiritual well-being, and then there's also like the negative like part of self-defeat, which is like stepping on others in order to get what you want, which is what you shouldn't exercise necessarily. So that eventually will lead to that things happening to you, because it's is your control.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky dance. And honestly, I'm 36 years old this year, and I still haven't figured this out, right? This is something I still struggle with. I still think about is how to be generous and yet get what I want, how to be kind and yet be respected, right? How to have a voice and have a presence in this world and yet respect other people and recognize their presence in this world. Very difficult. It's very difficult to do. So I think, again, we've touched on a very important nerve of our society, maybe of human society, but I think particularly our society. Again, I think it's something we'll need to struggle with and continue to think about for the rest of the semester, maybe the rest of our lives. And karma, as we've been discussing, is behind a lot of this, right? How do our actions affect the world? How do our actions create various patterns within ourselves? And how do our actions, again, sort of lead to fruits, right? There's always this agricultural metaphor with the seed, the plant, and then the fruit that comes from the plant. So actually, the Tibetan word for karma is fruit. It's action fruit, right? What are the fruits of your action? So it's again, a very agricultural kind of metaphor. So looking again just to the assignment, try to do more than just bad and good, right? If you're writing a story about a bad action, tell me how it's bad, right? Get into the nitty gritty of how it is bad and how that bad thing leads to a very specific bad result and how this action is tied to that result. Because again, the seed and the fruit are very intimately related phenomena, let's say. And so the action that is committed and the result that comes from it could be a good action too, need to be tied together too. That's going to be part of my assessment. Okay, I think that's enough. That was a good conversation. It's 8:15. We got 45 minutes, plenty of time. So one thing I want to go over, which will kind of bring us into these karma tales, is Buddhist cosmology. You can see that up at the top there. What is cosmology? Have you heard this term before? Cosmology. Cosmos. Yeah, that's a good start. What's cosmos? Everything. Yeah. Yeah. So I like what you guys are doing here. We got the ology, we got the cosmos, the study of the cosmos. And so it's still not totally clear what that is, right? I would break it down to three things, and I'll write them in the chat here. Time, space, zoology. And I'm just hitting you with another ology, which isn't very nice of me. But zoo means animals, right? It just means what are the beings? What are the creatures? What are the living things? And so we might kind of take our own cosmology for granted. If I ask you what are your own concepts of time, space, and zoology, you would probably lean on things like biology, physics, maybe chemistry, but probably not as much chemistry, to describe how time works, how space works, and what kind of beings there are in the universe, right? It feels pretty universal. These are facts. However, cosmologies are not always facts. They're not always based on facts. They're not always based on things that people observe. And in fact, in your own lives, maybe I can take a survey. Does anybody believe in ghosts? Has anybody seen a ghost before? Yeah, so ghosts are not necessarily part of a biological zoology, right? They're not like established facts in the world. Maybe some people try to do scientific studies about them. I'm sure there are somewhere. Definitely Netflix shows and that sort of thing. And so that's what we're starting to deal with here. We even have ghosts on this wheel. And so this image is a very famous image. It sometimes is called the Wheel of Life, and it demonstrates what Buddhists think is the universe, right? Is the world, is the cosmos, and what kind of beings are in that cosmos. So we've got gods at the top, we've got hell beings at the bottom, and in between we've got humans and animals, which we're probably pretty familiar with. And next to the gods are titans. They're actually not so important for our conversations. They're kind of like lower gods who are jealous of the higher up gods, and they fight with each other and stuff. And then we've got hungry ghosts. And we read about most of these kinds of beings in the karma tales, right? So these concepts of these beings, of these different types of reincarnation show up in a big way in the karma tales. So that's one reason we're kind of tying these conversations together. There's a hierarchy to this. I don't know if it's immediately obvious, where up and down are kind of opposites of each other. Left and right don't have as much value, but this is very common, I don't know, really across many societies, where up is generally better than down. How would you describe this hierarchy? Just on, whatever you already know about the gods versus the hell beings. How would you describe the differences between being up in heaven and being down in hell? How are those different? And everything in between. So stated differently, we've got a hierarchy from high to low. What is that hierarchy based on? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a sense that it's better to be born in a higher place than in a lower place, right? Yeah. Why is it better? Maybe this is so obvious that it's hard to even put into words. But why is it better to be a human than a ghost, for example? I guess we would have to know some things about ghosts to explain that.
It's considered desirable.
Yeah. Why? And so that's the question. Why is it considered desirable? Sam, right?
Yeah, I just remember from the readings that it was the center line, and everything above the center line, the Titans, gods, and humans, is considered desirable. Like that's where you want to be. And
yeah, actually, here's
an animal.
A different way of looking at it. We've got kind of ranked with numbers. It's a little more complicated because there are a bunch of different kinds of gods. But yeah, you can see humans, gods are above the humans, and then they put the Titans below the humans. They're sort of ranked equally in this one. So what is this based on? Maybe I'll just tell it to you. It's based on suffering, right? Or the absence of suffering, or we'd say even pleasure. You see what I'm saying here? Comfort, right? It's more comfortable to be a human than to be a hell being. It's more comfortable to be in heaven than to be in hell, right? Because what is the defining feature of hell is you're being tortured constantly in horrible ways. We can even zoom in and see some of these ways, right? There's the familiar like fire and brimstone kind of stuff. These guys burning and that kind of thing. These guys burning here. The image is sort of cut off. People are being like thrown in vats of oil and horrible stuff. But then there's also like these sharp rocks that people are falling on. There's cold hell, which kind of resembles New York right now a little bit. No, today's a nice day, but it was felt a little bit like that earlier in the week, right? And so the opposite would be true for the gods, right? Up here in heaven, everybody's having a good time. Everybody's beautiful. Everybody's playing music and having nice drinks and having nice food, right? It's basically like a big party all the time. It's sort of like college or something. And so in between is everybody else. Now, the gods in hell, the difference between heaven and hell is maybe kind of easy. Why do you think humans are higher than animals? Would you put humans higher than animals? Do you think animals suffer more than humans? Yeah. Yeah, very nice to say it. More control over your destiny. If we use Buddhist language, we could say more control over your karma, right? We can put intention behind our actions. Ellie?
We suffer actually more for the animals than the animals are suffering for themselves.
So
Because I feel like, like the birds, for example, or the species that could actually go extinct, like they don't know, but we know. And because we have self-awareness, we have intelligence, we have something that they don't, so they don't realize the danger they're in, so they can take it.
Would you say then ignorance is bliss, Ellie?
I feel like ignorance, even though it's bliss, it's also a curse. I'd rather be like aware and live, maybe like go through like hard hardships and be ignorant and live like without like worrying about anything. I feel like it's always better to be self-aware, even though that might cause you like more like pain, technically.
And well, it kind of brings us back to Brielle's point then, right? Because if you're aware of your problem, that first step is hard, like you're describing. Maybe at first you'd be like, oh, I wish I just didn't even know this was a problem. What's a good example of this? Actually, I'll tell you an example. I had a tooth. Say it again.
The red pill and blue pill thing.
The red pill and blue pill thing. Yeah, you guys familiar with this from the Matrix? Are we going to talk about that in this class? I've talked about that in class before. I think it's not in the syllabus for this class. I do it in my intro to Buddhism class now. I have done it in this version, but I decided to cut it out. But yeah, for those who don't know, it's in the Matrix, right? You guys seen the Matrix? Kind of a classic movie. And basically, it's been like co-opted by like the alt-right apparently, or it's a bit of a meme, I guess we could say. So, you know, the alt-right uses it for their own thing, other people use it for other things, but it's a sense, do you want the painful truth, right? The hard to swallow pill or whatever, or do you want to kind of have the pleasant ignorance? And that's sort of the choice that's being presented to us. But if we come back to Brielle's point, I think, again, it's a good one. That first step is painful, no doubt, right? I was about to tell you about a tooth I had pulled. And before I had it pulled, I could just ignore it for a long time. And then it just sort of got uncomfortable to the point where it's like, all right, it's time to do something about this, right? And very uncomfortable to get a tooth pulled. But at the same time, it's gone. All the problems associated with it are gone. My mouth is healing. It's much better. I can brush my teeth without having to like kind of dance around it anymore. If you ever had a tooth problem, then you know what I'm talking about. And so, you know, I'm better for it now. But that first step, the initial extraction, not very fun, right? It's in fact kind of one of the worst things. So coming back to animals, right? I don't know if you've ever had this experience. You're like walking out of the house. It's like cold and snowy, and you gotta walk to class along icy sidewalks, and you see a cat lying there in the sun, and they're just like taking a nap in the middle of the day. You know, sometimes you might think like, oh, to be a cat, to trade positions with that cat, you know, what I would give. But at the same time, you know, where would that cat be without you? You know what I mean? The cat is helpless. And if something happens, the cat gets stuck outside, what are they going to do? They're going to freeze. They're going to be in trouble. They're going to have to hustle. They have very little power over their destiny, to come back to Brielle's point. So I think this is what is really being expressed here. The biggest difference between humans and animals, according to this presentation, is we're smarter. First, we can talk. Talking is a big one, right? And of course, there's probably a dolphin out there who's smarter than I am. But in general, we're smarter. We know how to operate within the world, and we understand karma, right? Again, it always comes back to karma. What makes this wheel go round effectively is karma. And if we understand how karma works, we can play that game, and we can play it well, and we can get a better rebirth, right? Not so different from, I don't know, like the stock market or something like that. Okay, questions about this? Is that pretty clear? The different realms and how they relate to each other. So one thing to keep in mind is, those are the different beings. Space we can come to if we have time. There's not a ton of time left, so let's talk about time for a minute though. One thing to keep in mind about Buddhism, we've said this before, we'll say it again, is reincarnation, right? And the implications of that are actually very important. Because if we're reborn again and again and again, right, because that's the implication here, where does it all start? Right? Usually from our scientific perspective, there's usually kind of a start to time, right? When did time start, according to physics? I'm not a physicist, so don't quote me on this, but this is my very basic understanding. Say again? The Big Bang. Yeah, you guys familiar with the Big Bang, right? Maybe we'll write on the board. I'll try to make it so our friends at home can see. So you've got the Big Bang, right? And then time proceeds in maybe an infinite direction from there. We don't really know. Does that sound about right? I'll even make it look like a bang. And what is the Big Bang? I don't really know. I think it was a moment of extreme expansion. Is that right? It's basically a big explosion. The universe expands. Before that, everything was contracted. And we're afraid that another moment of contraction will come and everything will be destroyed, right? I think that's what physicists have nightmares about. The Buddhists would look at this and think, okay, that's a pretty good idea. But what is happening here? Right? What happened before the Big Bang? And so the Buddhists would not even deny something like the Big Bang. There's sort of interesting conversations between Buddhists and scientists that happen even now. But they would just say that time continues before that, right? That there was something again, karma, right? Cause and effect. Something must have caused this Big Bang to happen. And so they would be interested in this cause. And I think physicists would not even disagree with that. They would just say, we don't know what that is, right? Or at least I don't know what it is. And so I would argue, again, this idea of a Big Bang may have sort of some prior assumptions associated with it, Genesis style assumptions associated with it. And the Buddhists really kind of root those out, right? And they just say, let's just expand time in both directions. And the implication then is that with reincarnation, with infinite time, we have how many lives? Infinite lives, which is a pretty crazy idea, right? Because even in one life, you do a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of stuff in my life, and I'm a relatively young man. If I have infinite lives, I've done infinite stuff. There's not a thing I haven't done, even horrible things, right? I don't need to go into all the horrible things I could have done, but it makes you look at the rest of the world with a little more reach, right? Rather than seeing the horrible murderer who's on death row and think, oh, what a horrible person. I would never do such a thing. Once you think about infinite lives and infinite actions, you definitely have done such a thing. You have, and you'll probably do it again. Maybe not this life, but maybe the next, right? It opens things up. Even animals, right? There are a lot of Buddhist vegetarians. Why do you think there are a lot of Buddhist vegetarians?
Maybe because I feel like they use the animals, so like they're eating themselves.
Yeah, right? Or grandma, great grandma. Yeah, they're again karma tales. There are stories about this, right? Where in a previous life, this person's my enemy, and this person's my friend, and this person's my lover, or whatever. And then in the next life, all of a sudden, I'm eating my friend, and my enemy is now my child, and my lover is now my enemy, or something like that, right? We kind of keep shuffling around in this cyclic existence, right? You see that term up there? Why is it cyclic? Is we just go round and around and around and around and around. And a lot of these Buddhist stories are designed to make us feel repulsed, right? Feel sick of this cyclic existence and try to get out of it. And of course, that's what Buddhism's all about, in a way. It's getting out of the cycle. Questions about that? How does that sound? Now, one thing to keep in mind, we talked about gods before. They show up here. One major development in Buddhism, again, I think I mentioned this last time, is Buddhism's developing in a Hindu context. Remember this? I don't have the slide here, but there's the slide of the two gods kind of bowing down to the Buddha. Remember that? Worshiping him, something like that. So one of the big developments in Buddhism is to take the Hindu gods, who are like these creator gods, the ones behind Big Bang moments and that sort of thing, and put them in the cycle and say, yeah, you guys are powerful, you guys are cool, Brahma, you're great, Brahma, you're doing great things. But at the same time, you're still stuck in the cycle. You're not going to be Brahma forever, you're going to die eventually, and when you do, you're going to go down, well, there's nowhere else to go except down, right? And again, from a karmic perspective, that kind of makes sense, right? Because if they're at the top, they might get a little lazy, might get a little complacent. You guys ever had this experience before? Kind of at the top of the game, and then you're like, well, there's nothing else for me to do now. I can kind of let my guard down, put my feet up, hang out a little bit. And unless you're an incredible competitor, it's very hard to maintain that number one spot, right? Because you have nowhere else to go except down. So that's kind of behind this question. Why is it good to be a human? This is a term we're going to see a lot. There's something like a middle way that happens here, right? The humans are between the incredible suffering of hell, but also the incredible comfort of heaven, right? They got a little bit of each. We got plenty of suffering. Do you guys have a lot of suffering in your lives? I think at this point, after this past year, we can all come up with something, right, to complain about. I certainly can. Got a lot of complaints. In fact, I've become pretty grumpy in the last couple of years. To be honest. So lots of things to complain about, but at the same time, as we've already discussed, there are things we can do about it. Not everything. We can't control everything, but we can control some things, right? We can make decisions about what to eat, where to be. We can turn on the heat, turn on the lights, get comfortable, chill out, read a book, relax, have some fun, see some friends, go to class, learn some things, right? There are a lot of good things too. And so, this is the mix that we're in. And that is why rebirth as a human is seen as very precious, also very rare, right? If you think about how many bugs and animals and things there are out there, if each one of those is a being, I don't know how many beings there are even just on this planet, but humans are the vast minority. Would you agree with me? And so it's often compared to like a tortoise that comes up once every 100 years up from the depths of the ocean and having its head come through a yoke. You know what a yoke is? It's like a big piece of wood with a small hole in it. Basically like getting its head to come through a yoke, Again, part of that is to sort of light a fire under your ass and say, your time here is precious, it's impermanent, you are going to die one day, so do something with it, right? And it's actually a very powerful message. And it's an undeniable one too, right? Buddhists love to talk about death, remind you that you're going to die. And when this happens, again, you become repulsed with samsara. You begin to realize, like, wait a minute, yeah, I am going to die. That sucks. Then I'll be reborn, and I might be reborn in a crappier place. And that also sucks, right? I better figure this enlightenment thing out real quick. Otherwise, who knows what will happen. Okay. This, we don't have to go into too much. It just goes to show there are lots of different gods, right? As with, I don't know, any sort of religious scholastic traditions where you get lots of monks writing lots of books and having lots of ideas, you get lots and lots of details. So lots and lots of gods. Maybe you can see there are lower gods and higher gods, and then there are formless realms and form realms. And so what does that mean is you can reach increasingly subtle states. So I have a body, you guys all have bodies, but what this is saying is that some gods don't even have bodies, right? They're reaching states where the bodies become subtle and maybe ephemeral, and even to the point where they don't have bodies at all, right? The highest one, we go up to infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception. And so these are more talking about states of mind, maybe, right? Where you become an entirely mental being. So when we talk about acting with our mind, right? That's all that these very high level gods can do, is act with their mind. That's all they got. They don't have speech necessarily. It's almost like a Star Trek episode or something. So in any case, some people take these levels and map them onto meditation. And so there's a sense that by meditating, have you guys ever meditated before? You can reach these, we'll talk about meditation more later, but you can reach these more subtle states, right? These more subtle levels of your mind, and even have a glimpse of what it would be like to be a god, right? And perhaps even set up the causes, the preconditions to allow you to be reborn in the God realm. And so, of course, people who want to do that take advantage of that. I think we can skip over mental formations. We basically already talked about them. This is what follows you across lives, right? You might be wondering, what exactly is reincarnated, right? For Hindus, it's a very simple answer. It's the soul, very similar to sort of a Christian soul, right? You've got your body, and you've got your soul. Your body dies, the soul goes on. The Buddhists kind of challenge this, and they give a little more precise language. They say things like your karmic seeds come with you, very basic levels of your consciousness might be reborn, and along with that comes certain mental propensities where maybe you'll like the same things in this life that you liked in the last life. Not all of them, right? Very subtle things. And so obviously you don't always remember your past lives. Some people say that they can. But these very subtle mental traits kind of follow along with you. And again, this is how our actions from this life potentially affect our actions of the next life. Okay, how's that sound? We've got 20 minutes left to do the karma tales. Any questions about anything so far? All lecture-y kind of stuff. Why don't we spend really just the rest of class just talking about these stories? Maybe I'll turn the lights on to kind of give a different vibe in the room. We've got how many stories? It's 5, 6 stories across all the readings. It's page 28, if I remember. No, 24 to page 36. Yeah, so really short, right? Only 12 pages, but not the easiest reading, right? You got to kind of focus. I find it's increasingly difficult to focus these days, as I've already expressed. And so I've tried to kind of go light on the reading to the extent that I can. And so let's figure out these karma tales. Maybe we can get folks on Zoom to start talking to us as well. If you guys have devices that you can get on Zoom with, please bring them out. If you don't, then I can put you next to each other and you can talk to each other in person. And so, yeah, let's spend the rest of the class talking about the karma tales. I've got things that I would like to talk about, and but I would also like to hear things you want to talk about. Things we can think about are, what are the morals of these stories, right? The basic moral we probably already know is like, do good things, don't do bad things, right? But these get very specific, right? And that's what we want to look at, is what are the specific mechanisms of these various karma tales. So that's one thing I want you to think about. Reincarnation, where does that come in these stories? One thing I've been kind of hammering in this class is reincarnation is important, and it really changes the way you think about karma. So here are some examples where people are reincarnated. What's the role of karma, reincarnation? And then where does the Buddhism come in? Right? I've already mentioned that Buddhism, one part of Buddhism is learning how to kind of game the karma system, right? And so how does that play out here? Are there things that these figures could have done differently to avoid their fate, for example? Or are there things that they do that are good, right? That lead to good karma? And we see kind of both of them here. So those are the questions that I have. Maybe I'll throw them in the chat. I think the chat disappears when I put you in breakout rooms, so you can copy these down if you want to. Bottom line is, what are these stories about? What's the moral, karma, reincarnation, and Buddhism? Where does sort of the advice come in? I'm going to stop recording. So we're all on the same page. So how did that go? You guys have good conversations? That work okay? Yeah, so we're still kind of figuring out the technology and details of all this, but I think that general style will work, right? We break out into little rooms, use our devices. This is the kind of thing I've done in previous semesters, meaning last semester, and I think it'll work in here. And in fact, we have the luxury of having actually kind of a lot of space. I know we need to be socially distanced, right? So, we should keep like a chair between us, but, we can kind of make use of space. If we don't have headphones, we can sort of spread out, that sort of thing. We have less than 10 minutes left. Are there any interesting conversations that you guys had? Any interesting realizations you came to? Questions you want to talk about?
I was just thinking, I was thinking about this yesterday. I was gonna ask this. If you're like, when you're thinking about like reincarnation, and how, I was reading this thing how like time like isn't linear, could your past life like be on like in like a future timeline? Like my past life is like 100 years from now, and then it's like all just like a circle, like not like a linear.
It sounds like you're gonna write a sweet story, and I look forward to it. It might be a little confusing though. Another thing it makes me think of is like Rick and Morty. Is that what you're thinking of, where you have like different universes and you're passing between dimensions and that sort of thing?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. In Buddhist context, the way they think about time is actually, they talk about this a lot, actually. Buddhists love to talk about philosophy. They love to kind of lay out all the different details of the mind and how things are experienced and so forth. So time is usually described this way. It's like one moment of time must be caused by a preceding moment of time. Does that make sense? And it's a preceding moment of time must be caused by yet another preceding moment of time. And so you have all these little moments, you know, about that long. And in fact, there's a specific term for that. And that's basically what time is made up of all these little moments that get kind of sequentially ordered and placed together. So it doesn't open up a lot of room for branching paths, as far as I know. I think there's basically a linear sense of time, although it doesn't leave it out entirely either, right? There's some sutras that talk about, like, for example, you know, in a single pore, like in a pore of your skin, there's an entire world, right? So there is the sense of nested space where within this space there might be little worlds, like in a single pore of my skin, with like Buddhas all over the place and amazing things like that. So there's certainly quite a bit of imagination. There's a lot of imagination in terms of length of time. You know, eons, which are thousands and thousands of years, and then there are thousands and thousands of eons. So there's a lot of playing with that. Maybe you're aware the number 0 comes from ancient India. Are you guys aware of this? Sort of an interesting mathematical fact. And that is part of this conversation too, right? Is nothing, right? 0, where does that sort of figure in? So they do play with times. I don't know about branching times, but I think there are things sort of like simultaneously different experiences of the world. Because, you know, for example, this hungry ghost, which maybe you read about, we can't always see the ghosts, right? Would you agree with me that you don't always see ghosts? And that's true in Buddhist traditions too. It doesn't mean they don't exist. They just exist in kind of a different experience of the same world. Actually, you're making me think of a lot of things with your question. Another important detail is Buddhists bring a lot of attention not to like objective reality, but to our subjective experiences of reality, right? That even though we're all looking at the same desk here, right? The light that is bouncing into my eyeballs is different from the light that is bouncing into your eyeballs, right? Which is how we see things. It causes us to see stuff differently. And so this is also true for hungry ghosts. And because of their bad karma, they see things that we see very differently. So when we see a cup of water and we think that's very refreshing and delicious, they see a cup of like blood and pus and disgusting things, right? And so that's one problem with being this hungry ghost, is you are always hungry because you're surrounded by disgusting things and you end up having to eat them, but you don't really want to. You have this little neck and this big belly and you're basically starving all the time. So to answer your question, yes, Buddhists do play with this kind of thing, maybe not exactly in the way you described it, but there is a lot of room for multiple experiences of the same reality. Let's put it that way. Thank you. You're welcome. I'll be here all night, folks. Yeah. Let's get back to the story though. Any other comments? What did you guys talk about in your groups? Did you come to any interesting realizations? What was the most interesting story? Did you have any favorite stories?
I like the one of the monk who killed the bird.
Okay.
Intentionally and unintentionally killed that boulder.
Yeah. Pretty simple, right? The concepts are simple, but Sydney, your name's Sydney, right? Sydney told it very nicely, right? The monk unintentionally, it's sort of a nice story. He cleans his teeth. I thought that was a cool little detail, right? And then he just sort of is skipping rocks. You ever skipped rocks before? And he unintentionally kills a bird. And then that bird is reincarnated as a boar. And it's almost like that same rock, of course, a different rock, but a similar type of rock unintentionally is knocked off a cliff and it kills him. And so what's the moral of the story? What would you say, Sydney?
I don't know, I thought it was sort of right, kind of, he wasn't a bad person.
Yeah.
Like the black and white, he was kind of like accidentally killed someone, and it wasn't.
Let's check it out. And so these are the moments where we can go back to the reading. I think this was page 26, right? And you can see, actually, it does lay it out for you at the beginning of the final paragraph there. It says, yeah, we got a couple minutes. Even an unintentional act, right? And so bhikshu means monk. This is going to be one challenge in this class is I try to limit the number of foreign terms I give you, but the authors we're reading don't always do the same. Bhikshu just means monk. Even if an unintentional act, the monk killing the bird, results in an unintentional retribution, the monk being killed, then how much more so will murderers that are accompanied by evil intentions generate baleful retribution? So what is that saying in more understandable terms? Do you guys understand what I just read? So what's it saying? What's the moral?
So there's fun that we're not in control of. We're not in control of every outcome to our actions. But if we intentionally do bad things, then the karma that comes back will be so much worse than something that was out of our control.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes we do bad things by accident. There will be bad karma, right? And in fact, you'll get killed, right? It's not even like a little bad karma. Like, this is serious bad karma. And yet it's saying it would be even worse if he had killed that bird on purpose, right? So it's illustrating actually a ton of things. And so I agree, this is a really powerful story. It's very short, but as the combination of your summaries show, it really expresses quite a bit. And the beauty of the stone killing them both, I think there's a nice connection there. So I encourage, as you are thinking of your own stories, try to do this sort of thing, right? Where there are recurring images, the cause and the effect are linked to each other, even if it's not the same stone, they're both stones, they're both unintentional acts, right? Think about intention. Where does intention come in? Think about various other emotions and how those come in. And again, think about the Buddhist message, right? The Buddhist message here is really think about your intentions. Don't intentionally kill people. That will be very bad for you. Even if you don't get caught, right? Karma's going to get you. And so pulling this all together, we end up with pretty powerful stories. We're out of time. We don't have time to talk about any of the other ones. The slides are up on Moodle. So if you were confused about a story, you can go back to the slides. I pulled out what I think are kind of key quotations from them, so you can look at those and try to make sense of it. If you have any questions, send me an email. I have office hours today. I'm happy to talk. I teach again at 12, but basically between now and then I'm free. I'll probably eat like a brunch between now and then. No, I guess it'll be my early lunch before 12. But yeah, I'm around. So feel free to send me a message, and I'm happy to talk about writing or class or anything else. Otherwise, have a good day. Enjoy your other classes.